Good morning. You listen to FloorDaily.net, and I'm Kemp Harr. This morning, my guest is Tracy Hammond from Washington, a lobbyist with the Carpet and Rug Institute. Tracy, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Kemp. How about yourself?
I'm very good. You're with a firm called Polsinelli, and it's been a couple of years since we've talked, and I guess one of the reasons is there hadn't been a whole lot going on in Washington, has there?
Well, there's a lot of dust that gets kicked up in the air, but you can certainly argue that very little progress gets made.
That's right. Okay. Well, I know that the Congress has just gotten back. They've been out for about 7 weeks. I think they came back last week, and they've been out for a long time, haven't they?
Yeah, Kent, they've been out. 7 weeks is the longest they've been out in at least 16 years. They took an extra long summer recess to squeeze the Democratic and Republican conventions in, and then took the more normal extra 4 or 5 weeks off in August as well.
Well, I wanted to talk to you. There's two things, I guess. So the first thing on the agenda is this spending bill. Looks like that's reared its head again. We haven't been talking about that in a while. So why don't you give us an update on that?
Sure, absolutely. The federal government's fiscal year always ends on September the 30th, which, of course, is rapidly coming up. So Congress has to do something, otherwise you have a government shutdown on October 1st, which neither party wants, particularly going into elections in November. So because Congress has proven once again its inability to go through the normal process of appropriations bills and funding individual branches of the government, they're going to roll everything together into a larger bill that we call either an omnibus or a continuing resolution. An omnibus would cover the entire year. What's more likely to happen, actually what will happen, is there's going to be a continuing resolution or a CR that will probably fund the government through December and sort of set the stage for this Congress to come back after the elections in what we call a lame duck session to really hash out how to fund the government for the remainder of the fiscal year.
So the conservatives want to go ahead and just push it on out into January, but you think probably based on what you're hearing that they'll fund it through December and then there'll be a lame duck session.
Yeah, and you are right, Kemp. Conservatives would like to do this CR even past January, probably even into February or March of 2017. Their fear is that things in a lame duck are very messy. Members of Congress, just like everyone else, gets anxious around the holidays and they want to get back home, and that bad deals could be struck and spending caps could be broken, that sort of thing. And conservatives are worried about that. So to avoid that, they would like to see a longer CR go well into 2017. Mm-hmm. However, Democrats do not support that, and quite frankly, quite a few members of the House leadership, including Republicans and members of the Appropriations Committee, would also like to sort of, do their job and fund the government before the end of this year.
Okay. And with Obama's executive orders, does he even need Congress?
Well, some would argue that he sort of does whatever he wants with or without Congress, and he certainly has made the most of his, quote unquote pen and paper or pen and phone strategy that he implemented a few years ago. But there are still quite a few things that Congress does need to do, including obviously they still do have the power of the purse. Mm-hmm. And, no agency gets money without Congress's say-so for the most part. And within the context, whether it happens in a CR here in September or whether it happens in an omnibus piece of legislation in December, there's going to be some policy riders put on there as well. And those things could be anything from relaxing some financial regulations to putting some policies on there that will help curb, EPA's regulation, among other things that Republicans, because they do still control the House and the Senate, could put on through the appropriations process.
Yeah, well, that was the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, was this balance between the conservatives and the liberals in both the Senate and House. Obviously, we're overhearing news around the presidential election, but more on the balances of these two houses. What's it looking like is going to happen in November with them?
Sure. Well, I will start with the House because I think it's a little easier to game out, Kemp, and then we can move to the Senate. With the House right now, Republicans have an historic majority. They haven't had this size of majority since the 1920s. So obviously that goes back quite a few years. It's conventional wisdom, and I agree that they are going to lose a handful of seats, but the Democrats would have to net win 30 seats to take back the majority in the House, and that's just extremely unlikely to happen, barring some really unforeseen event between now and Election Day. So I think that the Democrats will probably net anywhere from 7 or 8 seats up to, maybe around a dozen seats, something like that, which, gives them a more credible minority, but they would still certainly be in the minority there.
Okay.
With the Senate, that is much more up in the air. Right now, Republicans have a 4-seat majority. Democrats need to win 4 seats and retain the White House to take back the majority. If Donald Trump wins the White House, then Democrats would have to net 5 seats because the vice president there would be a tiebreaker. There are a couple of seats that are very likely to switch to the Democrats. In particular, there's a Republican senator from Illinois, Mark Kirk. There's also a Republican senator from Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, that most folks see as pretty endangered incumbents. And the Democrats probably net those 2 seats. There are certainly some others that are trending in the Democratic direction. You can look at places like New Hampshire. You can look in places like Indiana with Evan Bayh's unretirement and deciding to come back as seats that could certainly flip Democratic. But there's Democrats have to retain all of their seats as well, including a very tough race in Nevada. And, Democrats still have to pick up more plus win the White House. So I think that the Senate could very well switch to Democrat majority, but it will be, I think, a razor-thin margin regardless of who is in charge. I think we're going to see a 51-49 ratio, maybe even a 50-50 ratio in the next Congress on the Senate side.
Interesting. What happens with 50-50? It's just whoever's in the White House?
Whoever's in the White House. The vice president is technically a member of the Senate and can vote and would, in theory, break all the ties.
Yes, sir. One last question I wanted to ask you. It seems like this presidential election process is a 2-year process, and especially with 24-hour news coverage, it just seems to be something you can't get away from. But I wanted to ask you, 10 years ago we didn't even have smartphones, and I wanted to ask you if you knew, how has the smartphone changed this whole political process?
I think it has in 2 ways, Kemp. One, you mentioned the 24-hour news. News is never shut off, and we get it 24 hours. You actually didn't say this. Some people still refer to a 24-hour news cycle. I think that smartphones have actually eliminated the 24-hour news cycle and compacted that even smaller, so that you have multiple news cycles in a day. Something happens at the end of the day or overnight, and that's what sets the agenda for the morning. And then the morning, what comes out of the morning and the react sets the agenda for the afternoon. Something else goes on during the day. You've got, another cycle in the evening, and it all starts over again. So, I think we've even moved away from a 24-hour news cycle to something much smaller. I also think smartphones and the way that they plug people into social media has really made the loudest voices, or you could argue the most conservative and the most liberal voices, even louder, and given them more of a platform and more of a voice, and you kind of lose the moderate voice in that cacophony, so that the loudest voices are magnified and soak up even more of the oxygen in the room, and I think that diminishes the folks in the middle.
Yeah. All right, Tracy. Well, it's going to be interesting to watch how this thing unfolds. I didn't want to talk much about the presidential contest because we hear about it all the time. Again, been talking to Tracy Hammond, the lobbyist with the Carpet and Rug Institute, and our insider for Washington. And you've been listening to Kemp Harr and Polsinelli.net.